Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 18 of the Rob Breakenridge Show. Thank you so much for being with us. Later in this episode, a recap of what's coming out of this First Minister's meeting in Huntsville, Ontario, including an announcement Tuesday morning from the premiers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario regarding a memorandum of understanding on building new pipelines. Now, this all comes as the federal government looks to identify projects that would be in the national interest and thus be fast-tracked under the new Building Canada Act. And of course, there's the added urgency to all of that provided by Donald Trump's tariff threats and trade uncertainty, so more on that to come. We begin this episode, though, with the latest on Ottawa's gun control measures and the ongoing implementation of changes announced way back in 2020. As you recall, in the aftermath of the Nova Scotia massacre, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced plans to ban so-called assault-style weapons and to put a freeze on handgun sales, while also allowing municipalities to ban handguns if they so chose. It was a strange and confusing approach to firearms regulations, but also an aggressive push beyond a regulatory status quo that had a broad, but certainly not universal, consensus behind it. Now, look, handguns are by far the most commonly used type of firearm when it comes to gun crimes in Canada, and the vast majority of those handguns are illegally smuggled into Canada from the United States. So it's hard to see how stopping the legal sale of handguns would improve public safety at all, but it's a real problem for legal handgun owners and retailers who now own something that can't be sold or passed down. As for these assault-style weapons, this has been a real mess, since assault-style weapon is a phrase more suited to politics than firearms classification. The term assault rifle has typically been used to refer to automatic firearms, the sort of firearms that have long been prohibited in Canada. The government approach to banning certain guns but not banning similar or nearly identical firearms has underscored this point. We're talking about semi-automatic rifles here, but the government is not banning semi-automatic rifles, just those that look a certain way for the most part. Semi-automatic rifles all fire a certain way, whether we call them assault style or not, and plus there are already existing legal limits on magazine capacity. Now, the government initially said that it wouldn't be going after hunters, but inevitably their list of banned firearms did include many popular rifles used for hunting. And then, of course, there's the whole matter of this buyback program, which is taxpayer dollars to be given to firearms owners who surrender these now prohibited guns to be destroyed. But we still don't know how this program is going to work or how much it's all going to cost. And again, it's hard to see how that does anything to improve public safety. In the meantime, though, it's aggravation and financial cost to law-abiding gun owners, and especially for law-abiding firearms retailers and sports shooting organizations. But on this file, as with others, we're left to wonder whether a policy change might be forthcoming under this new Prime Minister. Now, just recently, the Prime Minister spoke of forthcoming legislation on bail reform in the aftermath of a daytime shooting in Hamilton that killed a young woman. But Mark Carney also said it was a priority to, quote, control our border better. He went on to say, quote, I suspect, and we'll see when this individual is caught, that the gun came from the United States. So yes, a focus on the border and illegal guns and smuggling is most welcome, but it doesn't necessarily mean, though, that Carney is going to ease up on gun control policy. Now, back in March, so before the election, the government, in fact, announced an additional 179 models of firearms that would be added to the prohibited list. Now, they're also planning a review of the classification system in the fall. This was Associate Minister of Public Safety Rachel Bendayan making the announcement.
In 2020, our federal government banned what is now over 2,000 models of assault-style firearms. In 2022-23, our government passed legislation to freeze the market for handguns in Canada, banning the sale, transfer, and importation of handguns into the country. Just recently, in December 2024, we went further, banning some of the additional assault-style weapons that remained in the Canadian market. Today, our government is finishing the job, adding a further 179 unique makes and models of assault-style weapons to the list of prohibited firearms here in Canada. This prohibition takes effect immediately. It is our hope, our government's intention, that this be the last discrete listing of assault-style firearms for prohibition. If we finish the job well, we have all the tools necessary to ensure that new models of assault-style weapons will be captured and denied legal entry into the Canadian market. Let's be clear, these are weapons of war, firearms designed specifically to kill as many people as possible in the least amount of time possible. As with previous prohibitions, the weapons we are banning today are semi-automatic firearms with sustained rapid-fire capability. Experts have told us that they exceed safe civilian use.
Okay, so note the rhetoric there. It's been pretty par for the course from this government. She says firearms that are meant to kill as many people in as short amount of time as possible. It's misleading, of course, since, as noted, we're talking about semi-automatic rifles. And semi-automatic rifles are all subject to the same magazine limits. Again, some are banned, some aren't. Now, here's Bendayat elaborating on the need to review the classification system.
Today, our government is announcing the launch of a comprehensive review of the firearms classification regime. This responds directly to a key recommendation of the Mass Casualty Commission, recommendations from an independent expert advisory panel, recommendations from industry and industry representatives, as well as calls from both gun control advocates and gun owners. We are answering that call. It's become harder and harder for people who want to do the right thing to follow a classification system that is so complex. In the past, we've seen some firearm models that were designed for military use be later marketed for hunting and civilian use. The SKS, for example, was a firearm designed by the USSR for use in the Second World War. When the war was over, the surplus, of which there was a considerable volume, was dumped at a low price into the Canadian civilian market and marketed for hunting.
Okay, so take note of the fact there that she referenced a specific rifle, the SKS, and she holds this up as an example of a firearm that was intended for the battlefield. But here's the thing, the government isn't banning the SKS. So here was a question put to her about that obvious contradiction.
The SKS is an example, as I mentioned in my remarks, of a gun that was initially designed for one purpose and then marketed for another. I think the classification review, which I've announced today, will address that in particular. The SKS, of course, is a gun that, as I mentioned, has been used for hunting in Canada, particularly by Indigenous peoples. And in our discussions with Indigenous communities, it was made clear that they are used for sustenance hunting, which is a right that we must respect.
Okay, so as I said, that was all pre-election. We'll see if anything looks any different here post-election. But there's another important layer to all of this, and that's the RCMP. They have something called the Firearms Reference Table, or FRT, and that can also affect a firearm's legal status, as our next guest found out. The Sterling Arms rifle, the R9, has now been classified as prohibited under the FRT. Now, this would be another huge financial blow to a business that has already suffered under these legislative changes, which include last year's closure of the Shooting Edge in Calgary. Joining us now is JR Cox. He is CEO of the Edge Group and president of Sterling Arms International. JR, so great to have you with us here.
Oh, thanks, Rob. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Let's get a bit of background, first of all, and your involvement in the industry, what you've gone through more recently, but your involvement goes back many years, first of all.
Yeah, I was in the military for a long time, and in 2001, I got out and opened my first firearms business, which because I was a competition shooter before that. And so I opened in Calgary the Shooting Edge. So I had Shooting Edge for 25 years, and let's just say it's been a heck of a year. Last year, I was forced really to close down the Shooting Edge after 25 years. It comes down to, there's lots of factors. The stress from the Order in Councils banning first the black rifles. Then there was the ban for handgun transfers. So, we'd lost probably 70% of our revenue, and it was declining because with no new members for a handgun range, it's hard to survive. But our rent in Calgary went from, $61,000 just prior to COVID to $105,000 it was rising to on January 1st of 2025. So in October, we made the decision to, we got to pack it in because my wife and I, we'd already, we drained our savings. I'd cashed in my military pension, the whole 9 yards to try to keep it going. And, at a certain point, it's like, I don't want to be bankrupt for this thing.
Right. Yeah. So there's more going on than just firearms regulations, as you say. But in terms of, your clients, people that are using the Shooting Edge, for example, the challenges they now face with regard to the firearms they own, legal transport of those firearms, and just the whole weird mess around handguns and how strange that is. So what kind of a toll does that take then?
Well, personally, it's a huge toll on the business. But I think on the bigger picture, it's a huge toll on the firearms community. Most Canadians don't realize there's over 2.5 million firearms owners in this country. And that's a lot of it. That's when you think about it, of the adult population, that's a huge chunk, right? And so these regulations have had an incredible chilling effect and villainizing effect on that entire group of people in this country. And so it's very divisive, all of these changes. Because, I mean, prior to Trudeau in 2020, well, the firearms community wasn't happy. And neither was the anti-gun groups. So it was, right. In some ways, you kind of think if neither side is happy, it's probably the right balance. It's like, so in Canada, the general Canadian population was okay with us having our toys, like having firearms, because we don't have a Second Amendment right like the U.S. And I've never pushed that. I've never danced on that side of the fence. We have training classes, we have licensing, and I've had arguments with, very strong pro-firearm advocates about the whole licensing regime. I mean, I like it, but I'd much prefer that there is some safety training and licensing involved. The guy next to you is supposed to have, that kind of level of expertise just to know that the dangerous end of a firearm. And so prior to 2000 or 2020, there was this detente. And there was some transparency, but because the firearms reference table, I mean, that's the big thing right now, wasn't really the most important thing. Like the RCMP lab created this thing. I mean, we can probably get into a little later more detail, but now that this thing is being referred to, the 2020 ban, and how they've come up with these lists and the people they're relying upon to make these lists and the determinations. There's no basis in law for it. Like, this is a completely lawless scenario we find ourselves in. And it's one of those things is that now it's up to somebody to get charged and fight through the courts to prove that the RCMP are just a bunch of, they're being very, very nasty right now. And they're being allowed to have this. And when Carney says, well, we got to let the professionals, the experts deal with this. Well, it's definitely not the RCMP. They are not the experts.
Yeah, so let's get into detail on this a little bit more, because it does seem very arbitrary, this whole process of deciding on a firearm that's going to end up on this list. Like, it's behind closed doors in a lot of ways. Like, it's very bureaucratic, strangely enough. So let's talk about what happened then. I guess it's the RK9 or the R9 MK1 rifle, right? Yeah. From Sterling.
Let's go back. Let's go back to how the firearms reference table was created. So there's two RCMP lab technicians, right? The Murray Smith and Bill Etter. So about 20-ish years ago, these guys were working in the lab, and they said, hey, we should start making a reference table for our own use. And we're just going to start putting guns and just start, basically, there was no government direction. There was no funding. There was no guidelines. There was no guardrails. There was no terms of reference. These guys started doing this. And they would, so every firearm in there that's in that table is, every determination is at their discretion, because it's not like it's an official document. And in fact, if you look at the bottom of any page of the firearms reference table, it says this is not a legal document. Like, they keep saying, oh, this is just an opinion of a lab technician. So the first thing we have to do is find out who's a firearms lab technician. And in every other province, in every other jurisdiction, when you use the word technician or technologist, there is a significant legal wraparound as to what that means. So there's terms of reference, there's schooling, there's basically you've got to have you have standards, there's standardization. I didn't realize until recently that the federal government is exempt from all of that. So they can create a position and say this is a technician's position. And then they can just go out and they can hire whoever they want for that, put them in that role, and they're now a technician. So by and large, the bulk of the people in the firearms lab, there's only, I think, one person in the entire lab that has even a mechanical engineering degree. The rest of them are like, they might have been military gun plumbers, like weapons techs, or people who just like firearms. And now they're a firearms technician. They get a little bit of training and then off they go. And they're kind of said, hey, here's how we kind of do it and go. So there isn't that level of expertise that people think there is in the firearms lab. Are they bad people? No, but they're making decisions, and we've seen so many like just weird, contradictory statements and decisions coming out of there that it's clear that they need standardization and guardrails. Like there has to be something. So if we back then we say that this is not a legal document, this is not like the RCMP say this is just their reference. The issue with that is, and that's what our big thing is that then they're not open to criticism. We can't get a hold of their notes. So so when they come up with this determination for the Sterling Arms R9 Mark I, they don't have to release in their notes. They just say, here's our determination, but we're not going to give you any of the backstory. We're not going to tell you anything else. We're not going to tell you who the technician was. Nobody is held accountable. And more importantly, there's no formal process because it's kind of a part of our tenet in law is that, the police don't make laws. They're supposed to enforce things. They're supposed to come up with policy. The problem is because the firearms reference table, they guard this. The RCMP guard the firearms reference table to keep it becoming law or even mentioned in regulation. Right? They don't mention anywhere because the moment it's enshrined somewhere in a government regulation, then they have to actually have a process to appeal. They have to have processes for transparency. So they don't want that because often, I mean, they've tried to ban firearms. Like they tried to ban an airsoft rifle because like a plastic gun, try to make it a prohibited firearm because it looked like an AK-47. Right. So that there's some, I would say, asinine decisions coming out of the lab. And that's the thing. So that's the problem. So we come back here and we look at the history of the firearms reference table. We see where it evolved from, and we see the philosophy of the people, the two guys who set it up, and what's permeated. And so now, like, I think what's happening is the Sterling Arms R9 is now everything's kind of bubbled to a head. Like people have just had enough because they're now making arbitrary decisions. It's clearly political or made with lack of information. And I think that's the thing is with the R9, it's a lack of information. It might be political too. Like we're not sure. We don't know who asked them to finalize the FRT, but the determination of it is clearly wrong. Like it's technically wrong. It's illogical. So now we have to look at that and say, okay, now we have this firearms reference table that was document, which was issued by the lab. And so it's like, okay, well, how did they get there, and how do we appeal this? And in the past, basically, they've told people, to pack sand. Like we've made this our determination. Because of media, and MPs that don't have a lot to do right now, we've managed to get the RCMP to blink and say, well, we're willing to give this a reevaluation. Send us a technical package. So we've spent the last week putting together a very detailed technical package because we're clearly right. Like it's not like we're dancing on the needle and saying, well, if you kind of look at it like, we're trying to play games here. It's like, no, we know when we built this, that this completely met the requirements to be a non-restricted firearm in Canada, post OIC.
But they're putting the onus on you.
Oh, they 100%
Instead of having to prove to you, you have to prove to them.
Well, more importantly, I mean, there was never any consultation. Like, right. Well, what happens is look back. So they issued this on July 6th on Sunday. So Sunday morning they published this FRT. I get a phone call or an email in the afternoon saying, "Hey, have you seen this?" And it was the FRT for the R9 saying it's a prohibited firearm. And I'm like, no, like, where did you get this? Like at first, and then Tracy Wilson from the CCFR reached out almost immediately and sent me this. And she said that she first double checked to see if it was AI. If somebody had done this as a joke or, as a cruel joke, but no, it was actually from the RCMP internal website. So it wasn't even available to the public yet. It was just an internal business document. So I had no idea. Mm-hmm. So they make these rulings and they're done without any consultation with the actual manufacturer. So like that's
the consequences though are huge, right? Because this speaks to the legality of what you're producing.
Right. And so this is where they're sucking and blowing. So they say it's not a legal document, and this is just the opinion of the lab. In the same press release, they go, well, yes, but if anybody who has these rifles can no longer use them, take them out, sell them, do anything with them, right, you better put them in your safe because they're a prohibited firearm, or you're going to get charged and go to jail for 10 years. Like it's in the same press release. This is just an opinion. However, if you get caught with it, we're going to throw you in jail. I mean, that's the stuff banana republics do.
So basically we have in Canada, like I think it's non-prohibited, restricted, prohibited. Right?
Yeah, you have non-restricted, which is like your hunting rifles, sporting rifles, like long guns. Then you have restricted, which is like your handguns or shorter barreled rifles, things that meet that semi-automatic, that meet that criteria. And then prohibited. And prohibited used to be a very small list that was created in the 70s and the early 90s. And now it's a much greater list. I mean, it includes everything from grenade launchers to safari rifles, to large caliber hunting rifles. It's amazing the stuff that they've decided is, again, prohibited. Like, and it all comes out of, I mean, we're talking about archaic World War I rifles that they've now made prohibited.
And this all gets back to what changed in 2020, right? The idea that the government was going to ban what they called and still refer to as assault-style weapons. Now, that seems to involve some semi-automatic rifles, not others. The criteria seems very arbitrary, but in all your years, JR, of being in this industry, had you ever heard the term assault-style weapon? Does it have any technical, any realistic meaning here?
My father years ago, not even referring to the gun, said if anything says style, see, it says like it's beef styled stew. He goes, how much beef is in it? Right? Like if anything is like, how much is in it? So if they say it's assault style, it means it's not an assault rifle. Right? And what is an assault style? Like, so there's no such thing term. The Liberal government made this term up, and they force it down through the CBC and legacy media to try to add that phrase to our vernacular. It's a completely made up, bogus term, and nobody should use it. Nobody should accept it as a term. Like people should be laughing, saying, well, "What does assault style mean?" Right? It means nothing. Like so, everything is like like internal combustion engine styled vehicle, right? It could refer to an electric vehicle because it's kind of stylized like a gas powered vehicle, but it's not, right? So that's the thing is that it's a crappy term, and it allows them to wrap anything up. And then the other phrase that I love to hate that the Liberals keep saying is that a firearm that is only designed to fire as many bullets as fast as possible to kill as many people. It's like, again, like, so you're going to say the widest vehicle is designed to kill the most people because it can, if it goes through a crowd, it'll catch the most widest swath at one time. Like these are just dumb statements, and we have allowed, stupidity to become the norm in politics. Like we should have abolished those people a long time ago. Because if they're going to be that, that dumb, we shouldn't have them around. We should be embracing intelligence.
Right. Well, it was funny because, early on the government said, look, we're not going after hunting rifles. And then clearly they did. And I think they still are. Rifles that have long been used for hunting are now considered these assault-style weapons because the government can't seem to figure out what the criteria ought to be. So it becomes this wide net.
100%. And the problem is they've asked these people who don't like firearms owners in the lab, to come up with this list and to add to this list because they can keep adding. Like, think about it, the Liberal government, like the Carney government now, Carney stood up during after he became prime minister and said that he was the firearms laws, they were gonna look at this because they were not going to attack the law abiding, and he said competitive shooter, sport shooter. He said sport shooter, and so there wasn't a lot of guns left. And so what does they do? He lets the RCMP ban one of the last semi-automatic rifles used by sport shooters. These rifles, like, so Tristan, Rutledge, I can't keep, he's got a double barrel name. Tristan, he just went to the World Cup in the States for Steel Challenge and came in third with an R9. Like, it's clearly a sporting rifle. Yeah. And half the Canadian team that shoots IPSC, which is a practical shooting league in 3-gun, they all have Sterling Arms rifles. They were all practicing with Sterling Arms rifles, and they placed, they didn't podium. They had placed very well. And so this is one of the last rifles used that's allowed in sport shooting. And so Carney lets these guys do this. It just undermines the whole situation. They say they're not going to go after sport shooters, so they ban a sport shooting rifle.
Right. So what's the impact then if this ruling or this classification stands?
Well, the first thing I do is, I was just opening up a new retail store in Calgary called Gun Culture, and I had to shut it down. Like, I can't bleed money like I did for the Shooting Edge. Like, I just don't have the bandwidth. And we were using the sales of, proceeds of sales from Sterling, because they're very different companies, to take the profits out of that and get this other retail store open. So we'd have more offerings for the Canadian public. I had to lay off 5 of the staff over at Sterling Arms. They're gone. I'd love to get them back. They know the situation. They know we're fighting, but I just don't have the bandwidth. I can't bleed the cash. So immediately, when you think about like this stand, we've already impacted so many families because of this arbitrary decision. And so that's why I have to fight this. I have to fight it to the bitter end, because I owe it to my staff, my former staff, the people who bought this rifle, the people who believe in us. We just can't let them go. We can't let the Liberals win on such a flimsy ruling.
What's the thing, right? Is any of this making anybody safer? You talked about how having smart regulations can make a difference, but I can't see how this is making anybody any safer.
Well, this has never been about public safety. They wrap it up and they put this little bow on it and then go, if it just saves one life and all this. But it's never been about public safety. It's about public manipulation. It's about appealing to the Liberal base who just ideologically don't like firearms. Like, they just don't. And the difference between a conservative mindset and a Liberal mindset when it comes to these things is a conservative says, I don't like it, so I'm not going to participate in it. You do you. Just don't hurt me. They can, in fact, impact me, but you do you. That's what, that's a conservative mindset. The Liberal is, I don't like it, therefore I got to take it away from you because I don't like it, right? So there's a different mindset in just how people think about these things. So when you look at firearms laws in general and the general public, and you look at public safety, Toronto has a firearms problem. Montreal has a firearms problem. The rest of the country does not have a firearms problem. So we're held to this standard because they can't get their shit together in Toronto, Montreal. Right. Really, when it comes down to it, like, we're held to this standard. Plus, Carney finally admitted, as we've known and we've been screaming for years, that almost all of the firearms, especially the handguns used in crimes in Canada, are smuggled in from the U.S.
Yeah. Right.
So the 93% that the Toronto Police Service can track were smuggled from the U.S. So you have 7%, and they go, well, there's 7% that came from Canada. No, that 7% is the guns they couldn't track. So how many of those came from Canada? Like, we don't know. They won't tell us that, break down that percentage. They're just focusing, saying, well, 7%, we're not sure. So those could come from Canada. Well, they could, but they could, again, more U.S., but they could have been smuggled in with no serial numbers and things like that we didn't. They can't track it. So there's all kinds of things like that that show it's not about public safety, right? It's an ideological thing.
Well, and I do wonder, you mentioned, the comments about guns coming across the border, that the government's acknowledging that. Do you think that signals any kind of shift in policy, that maybe they're prepared to focus more on smuggling in illegal guns instead of, this approach we've had since 2020? Any signs that there's any shift here?
I'd like to think there would be, because, Carney's been willing to, walk away from Trudeau policies. And so it would be smart. Like, when you think about it, it'd be really smart for him just to say, yeah, like, we looked at this and we've had 5 years to look at this and we're broke. So instead of spending the anywhere from $3 billion to $10 billion on doing this buyback compensation program, we're not going to do that because those firearms weren't a problem before. Like, we've now had more data. That's the thing is they have a chance to say we've had a chance to look at more data, and these aren't a problem. So we're going to go back the way it was. Like, we can get rid of these ordering councils, or they can make changes. Say these now can only go to a range or things like that. But we get our guns back. So he could easily do that and actually put the money towards the borders. Like when they say, like, was it that prior to 2023 or 24, zero train cars were checked. Now 1% of train cars are getting checked. So you buy a car in the U.S., you stuff the trunk full, and you say, I'm moving to Canada, and you bring this car across in a train car with 200 guns in the trunk. It comes out in Canada. Now you got 200 more guns in the system because they haven't checked anything.
Right.
That's
where the crime's coming from.
That's where the crime's coming. And you can move a lot of guns. Mm-hmm. Like, they're moving a lot of guns. So we've got to give the CBSA, the RCMP, like all the border people, the abilities to actually check and do their jobs. Right. And I don't hold or begrudge the CBSA. I mean, they have a tough job. So, I mean, part of their job is, like, when you think about it, traditionally it's tax collection. They're at the border to say, oh, you brought too much booze in. Give us our 25% tariff money on that bourbon. That's really, when you think about the bulk of their job. But now they've got to deal with illegal immigration. They've got to deal with border. They got to deal with the smuggling. They got so many things to deal with. Human trafficking. So their mandate has changed so much, and we haven't given them the tools or the resources. Like, even just like the sooner the RCMP of Alberta, the better. If nothing else, to give those thousands of RCMP officers a job helping to patrol the borders and deal with the CBSA and do what they're supposed to be doing, which is protecting Canadians. So there's that whole aspect that if we should be taking these billions of dollars and actually using it to protect Canadians instead of persecuting Canadians.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we put some money into the buyback, but obviously the big dollars are yet to be spent. So the government could still shift course here. But in the meantime, it's just a confusing mess, isn't it? Especially for firearms owners who've been told that firearm you've legally owned for all these years, it's now prohibited, but sit tight because we're trying to figure out what to do with it or what we expect you to do with it, where you're supposed to take it, how much money you're going to get. Like, it's all a mess, isn't it?
Well, it's a huge mess. I mean, even the buyback program for the businesses is a mess. I mean, we put some claims in early on in December, and we still haven't been paid for them. So, no, exactly. So December. And now they're coming back. They came back partway through when they said, to businesses, we're limiting you to 200 parts. What do you mean? And we're like, what do you mean 200 parts? They go, we're a manufacturer. Like, we sold 1,000 rifles a month. So we have, and you got to plan out. So there's no such thing as just-in-time delivery in the firearms industry. So I have tens of thousands of parts. And the response was, well, pick your 200 most expensive parts. So I have a sea can full of gun parts that they said they were going to buy back. I can't use them for anything. I can't build anything else with them. But so supposedly they're going to say that the buyback, the compensation program for businesses was a success, even though, I mean, and I'm getting on the light end. You got poor guys like Rob Breakenridge over at Black Creek Labs. He's probably, they for his specific firearms that they banned, he probably has anywhere from $4 to $6 million in parts.
Wow. He
probably got a claim of like $10,000. Like, how is that fair? You've banned these things. You say you're going to buy them back, pay us for them. Because it's not a buyback. We have to remember that. They've never owned these things. So they're not buying anything back. They're taking taxpayer dollars and they're buying them. So it's a double whammy.
Well, JR, we'll see what happens with the R9 specifically in your company, and then obviously where this all goes on the policy side. But perhaps we'll touch base again down the road. JR, thanks so much for making some time for us here today.
Hey, take care, Rob. Thank you so much for giving some light to this really important situation. Because for Canadians, they should be concerned about this. Because if the government's willing to do this with firearms, because it evokes that emotion, what's next? What else are they going to ignore people's rights on?
Yeah, there you go. Once again, JR Cox, President, Sterling Arms International, CEO of the Edge Group. We'll see what happens in terms of this dispute regarding the status of the Sterling Arms R9, but also this bigger question of where gun control policy is going under this new prime minister. We'll step away for a moment. A few of the things we'll get to in our time remaining, including the latest on what's happening at this first ministers' meeting out in Huntsville, Ontario. As mentioned, an announcement or a signing of a memorandum of understanding Tuesday morning with Alberta's premier, Saskatchewan's premier, and Ontario's premier. We'll have the latest on that. A couple other things to touch on as well. You're listening to the Rob Breakenridge Show. All right, welcome back. As mentioned earlier, it is First Ministers gathering this week in Ontario, in Huntsville, Ontario, at a pretty crucial moment, both with C5, now the law of the land, and some big decisions to be made about major projects that will be deemed to be in the national interest and will presumably get fast-tracked under the Building Canada Act. There's also the whole issue of Trump tariffs, the new threat or the new deadline, I guess, of August 1st. And even the Prime Minister suggesting recently that perhaps any trade deal we're able to get with the U.S. is still going to have some tariffs attached to it. So maybe a little bit more urgency when it comes to building up Canada's economy. So that's the focus at this meeting. Now, interestingly, here on Tuesday morning, just as we get set to put out this podcast, a joint statement or a joint announcement from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, three prominent conservative premiers, obviously. But they've announced a new expanded memorandum of understanding calling for pipeline capacity to be built in this country to make that a top priority. Here's some of that announcement here Tuesday morning.
Today, we're signing a memorandum of understanding that makes Saskatchewan an official signatory and partner as we work together on building oil and gas pipelines and expanding trade corridors to global markets. This agreement will see our three provinces advance pipelines and pathways to boost exports of homegrown energy, potash, critical minerals, and agricultural products to markets across Canada and across the world. Our three provinces will also continue our joint calls for the removal of federal barriers to nation-building projects so we can collectively advance pipelines, rails, transmission infrastructure, and other major projects. We know their strength in taking a united front, but we cannot achieve our shared provincial goals without cooperation from the federal government. Alberta knows this. Saskatchewan knows this, Ontario knows this, and it's time for the federal government to acknowledge it as well. And if Prime Minister Mark Carney doesn't want to work with us, it's not just myself and Scott Moe he'll have to worry about. He'll also have to contend with Premier Doug Ford, who has said many times he'll be all over him like an 800-pound gorilla. So it's time to get rid of the bad laws that have harmed Canada's ability to grow the energy sector and other industries such as mining and manufacturing. By now, you should all know these bad laws that I speak of quite well. Bill C-69, the oil and gas emissions cap, the tanker ban, the net zero vehicle, and net zero electricity mandates. Removing these anti-resource, anti-development laws will allow Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario to attract the investment and project partners we need to get shovels in the ground, grow industries, and create jobs. So I'm excited to continue collaborating so that we can reach our shared goals, including to advance pipelines and responsible energy development. This new way of working together across provincial borders will benefit the people of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, and ultimately all people across Canada.
Okay, but of course, what ultimately matters here is what the federal government decides to do. So here's both Premier Smith and Premier Ford when they were asked about what they've heard from the Prime Minister so far, what they hope to hear from him still.
I'm wondering what you heard from Mark Carney last night and what you hope to hear from him today.
What I've heard consistently from Mark Carney is that he wants Canada to have energy dominance and be an energy superpower, and that he wants us to diversify our markets, starting with doing more trade with each other. That's what the MOU is about today, is how can we find a way to support each other, and then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets. That's the only way I think that Canada will be able to have the security, the energy security we're looking for. And it's not just energy. Once we have those routes that are established and we can build out rail line and port infrastructure, that's great for food export, for fiber export, for manufactured goods export. So those are the things that I think that the provinces are taking the leadership on, and everything I've heard from Mark Carney seems to suggest he's supportive of that. He would demonstrate his great support if he would repeal or substantially revise the 9 bad laws that are impacting our investment climate. He hasn't done that yet, but as I've said, we're giving him some time to get into the role. He's got a new legislative session starting up in September, and we'll have a better idea of what kind of revisions he's going to make then.
Well, I know Prime Minister Carney, he wants to be one of the strongest economies in the G7, which we're confident we can do. But as Premier Smith said, we have to get rid of the regulatory burdens. That's what's holding us back. And when we do that, we can unleash the economic powerhouse Canada truly is, diversify our trade, build pipelines west, east, south, north, and get critical minerals out of the ground, not in 15 years, but within two years, get permitting happening a lot quicker. That's what's going to make sure that we're an economic powerhouse, build large infrastructure projects across the country as well. But we'll have a further discussion with Prime Minister Carney today, and we'll get into it a little deeper at the table.
Okay, one more clip here, and it's a response, a very brief response from the Premier regarding a very troubling matter that surfaced in Alberta this week. The Globe and Mail has revealed that one of its reporters, Carrie Tate, has been subject to an online campaign aimed, it would seem, at discouraging her from reporting on the scandal that has emerged with regards to contracts and procurement in Alberta's healthcare system. Now, the Premier did, in a separate interview, condemn the harassment, as so many others have, but she didn't have much more to say Tuesday morning when asked about whether she knew the political fixer allegedly at the center of this campaign.
We're in Ontario to work on some pretty important issues, like the threat of tariffs, and we met with the nurses this morning. We met with First Nations yesterday, and we're talking with the Prime Minister about how we're going to get national projects built. I've given you a statement. I did an interview with CTV. I'd direct you to that. I have no further comment on it.
All right, like I say, very brief response there from the Premier. When asked about this whole story, I don't think this story is going away. We'll see what more develops on that front, but that's going to be one to keep a close eye on. And, of course, we'll see what still comes from this Premier's meeting, this First Minister's gathering here this week in Huntsville, Ontario. As mentioned, the stakes are high as we approach this August 1st deadline. And, of course, with regard to C5, and whether it's actually going to unleash new construction, building new major projects in this country. Listen, that's pretty much going to do it for this episode of the Rob Breakenridge Show. I did want to mention this. I had teased in the last podcast a bit of an announcement here this week. The announcement's been made. I'm very excited about this new project. It involves our friends at The Line, Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson, and they built something pretty remarkable. ReadTheLine.ca is their website if you haven't been following their work. So I'm very excited to be partnering with them in the launch of The Line Alberta. So that's going to be a new weekly podcast that's going to drop each Wednesday, starting next week, July 30th, with a specific focus on what's going on in Alberta. So much going on in Alberta. It's a really exciting and important time right now for the province of Alberta, and telling some more specific Alberta stories in a longer form. There'll be some written commentary as well. So all of it at The Line, much more at readtheline.ca. Also, Alberta.readtheline.ca will be the separate channel for some of this Alberta coverage. So, like I say, very excited about this, very excited to be working with Matt and Jen, and really admire and appreciate what they've built with The Line, readtheline.ca. So that'll start next week, as mentioned, coming up on July 30th, The Line Alberta. New episode each and every Wednesday. We'll have another episode of the Rob Breakenridge Show for you coming up this Friday, July 25th. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and other streaming platforms. And, of course, check out our YouTube channel as well, Rob Breakenridge Show. Have yourselves a fantastic week, folks, and we'll talk to you on Friday. Take care.